From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to the show once again. Well, it's all over for now, isn't it? That Washington drama that Andy Borowitz this morning referred to as the most expensive Civil War reenactment in history. Well, the stock market survived, and at least for now, our legislators can get back to debating all those important things like getting the government off our backs and guns and abortion. So are we only imagining this, or has the political world just gone completely nuts? Are we nostalgic when we remember a simple time when a president could get elected for a few $1,000,000? Did you know, by the way, that the grand collective bill for all television advertising in 1972, from president all the way down to the city councils, was $37 million? Now, if you account for inflation, that was 3% of what was spent last year on TV. Did you know that when all the bills were paid for TV, online, direct mail, robocalls, and consultants, that the politicians spent about $10 billion in 2013? So with all that money, I guess we can assume that we bought a better class of intellectually superior, thoughtful, compassionate elected officials, right? Well, we'll let you ponder that one. So how did we get here? How did we become so polarized? Well, today's guest is Bob McChesney, and he would probably say something along the lines of follow the money. Bob and his co-author John Nichols have written Dollarocracy, and on the morning after what we've just been through, I can't think of a better conversation to have, so thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Ken.
Bob McChesney is a professor in the Department of Communications at the University of Illinois at Urbana, and we welcome him back to Chicago Newsroom. So Bob, the place I think we really need to start is, if they spent $10 billion, they had to find $10 billion somewhere. And that's the real question, isn't it? Where did all that money come from? Who gave it to them?
Well, it comes mostly, when Willie Sutton, they asked him why he robbed banks, the great bank robber, he said, because that's where the money is. And if you have to raise a lot of money, as politicians do, and most politicians today, elected officials in Washington and Congress, spend 20 to 30 hours a week, year-round, raising money. Well, you aren't going to call up poor people. You aren't going to call up grandma and ask her for a cut of the Social Security check. You're calling rich people who can give 4, 5, 6, 7-figure donations. And over the course of a span, someone like Sheldon Adelson or the Koch brothers are people who are giving in the $200 to $400 million range annually now, or for election cycle. And so that's who gives the money. And what happened with Citizens United and with the changes in the Supreme Court, which have unleashed the ability of wealthy people to give more and more money, it didn't change anyone who gives under $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000, the sort of people we want to encourage to give campaigns. It unleashed the people who want to give $100 million or $50 million, to basically give unaccountable donations that we don't really know where exactly it's coming from, but can buy an enormous number of ads and have a great deal of influence on the outcome of elections.
One of the things that you point out in Dollarocracy that I have to say in just a weird way, it's almost funny, is you think about someone like Sheldon Adelson giving so much money to Newt Gingrich and everybody else, and then when Newt flamed out, he had more money for everybody else, and you think, wow, this guy is so committed, he's giving a huge portion of his money. I mean, he's really betting his life on this. Not so much. No,
he's worth $25 or $30 billion. He's one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. And we did the math. If he gave like $200 million a week for like a year, he would still be among the few hundred richest people in the world. But the most important thing about a Sheldon Adelson is to understand that for someone, once you start giving over $5,000 or $10,000 a year, with only a handful of exceptions, it stops being like a civic contribution because you believe someone would be a good president or governor or senator, and it becomes an investment.
One of the key words in your book, investment, that rich people have started to look at their political contributions not as contributions but as investments. And as in all investments, you expect a return.
And Sheldon Adelson, most of the rich people do this like to keep it anonymous. They don't want to brag about what they're doing if they're giving, they're influencing a decision of the government to favor their commercial interest immediately or give them a tax break of some sort. Sheldon Adelson, to his credit, really, he likes the limelight. And so in an interview with the Washington Post after the election, he said, they asked him about his political views. He said, well, I'm for socialized medicine. I believe in a woman's right to choose. I believe that climate change is a real problem. I believe in same-sex marriage. I'm a pretty liberal guy. But when I contribute to politicians, it's an investment. I want low taxes. I hate labor unions. I don't want the government regulating my business very closely. Right. That's why I spent $200 million. Probably if Sheldon Adelson was investing in stuff he values, he'd probably give $100 to a candidate. But he's doing an investment to expand his net worth from $30 billion to $50 billion and to keep the government from getting in his way.
All right, so now let's take you out of the book for a moment and put you in this day, this morning, where we see what has this soap opera that's been going on in Washington for the last couple of weeks, the shutting down of the government, the toying with economic disaster. Put that in context with Dollarocracy. How did we get there from, let's say, the 70s, or you pick the day? What is this timeline?
Boy, that's a big question.
I know.
To put it in a small, bite-sized chunk, our basic argument is the great crisis in the country today is that our political system has moved way into sort of serving corporate and commercial and wealthy interests. And we always think of the Republican Party as the handmaiden of the powerful and the wealthy, but the Democratic Party has moved in its wake too. It's a much more pro-business party. Labor ostensibly supports the Democrats because they're afraid of the Republicans, but the Democrats give them very little in terms of legislative wins. And so we have this whole political system has moved over here, so the range of debate, as the saying goes, extends all the way from GE to GM. And you've got the great bulk of the population, we think, which is actually not there at all, that is looking for real government solutions to real serious economic, social, environmental problems. And this is the great tension of Dollarocracy. The bought-off system is failing at serving the needs of the people and is alienating them. And what's happened in Washington in the last month, I think, is a sign that these policies are unpopular, they're dying, and we're left with the Republican Party at this point is close to a point where it can't win a national election anymore. It wins in states in off-year elections like 2010 when the voter turnout rate's down in the 30, 35, at most 40% range. And poor people basically stop voting. And they win in the House of Representatives because of gerrymandering, which they control. I mean, most Americans, a majority, voted for Democrats in the House in 2012, but they have a landslide lead because they gerrymandered the district. So in a state like Pennsylvania, where most Pennsylvanians voted for Democrats to be members of the House in 2012, of the 18 seats in the House of Representatives from Pennsylvania, 13 are Republican because of gerrymandering. And because of that, you have this sort of minority within a minority that is exercising the ruthless power because they know they can't win a fair election. The Republican Party went with that agenda of things they wanted to shut the government down over. They had a long list. All of those things have been rejected by voters whenever they've come to the polls. So they're using whatever they can. They're grasping at extra legal methods almost to push an agenda through to satisfy, and almost, you go down that list, huge donors at every single point. Getting rid of net neutrality, for example, on the internet, which was one of their issues they're going to close the government over. It was basically just a gift to Verizon and AT&T. That's all it was. And
I want to come back to that very issue and spend some time on that because to me that's one of the most crucial issues. But just for a moment, if we could stick with this thing, a very important quote. This is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people no longer. It is a government by the corporations, of the corporations, and for the corporations. Spoken by Rutherford B. Hayes in 1887. Since the founding
former President Rutherford B. Hayes.
Yes, former president.
Republican president.
Since the founding of our nation, the tension between, I don't know what you want to call them, ordinary folks and folks who run the play,
very
who have
wealthy
the money.
People and everything else. People with lots of property and people with little or no property.
Right. John Jay, the first chief of the Supreme Court of the United States. Those who own the country ought to govern it. Our chief jurist said that a long, long time ago. So it's not something that has just happened in our lifetime or in the last 20 or 30 years. This tension has always existed. But I get the feeling that if I see a graph of this, tension, black versus white line, it kind of goes up and down over the couple of hundred years, and then suddenly, like global warming, like that Al Gore chart, it just feels like it's just gone off the chart in the last 20 or 30 years. Is that madness?
No, the context of Dollarocracy is this. Between the late 19th century, when Rutherford B. Hayes said that, we went through the Gilded Age, and that was an era in which property, greed, corruption took over the whole country. And from 1900 to 1970, this country, though, had a reaction to that. There were pitched political battles in the Progressive era, the New Deal, and then the Great Society in the 1960s. And democracy actually won a lot of big fights. We made this a better country. We made it possible for there to be Social Security and unemployment insurance. We had the right to have trade unions, belong to unions. We expanded public education so that working class people in many cities in this country could get decent, even sometimes first-rate education. We expanded higher education so that we had a larger percentage of our young people going to four-year colleges than anywhere in the world. These were great victories. These were difficult fights. These came through the expansion of the vote, from people organizing, the Civil Rights Movement, the Voting Rights Act. And by 1970, America was a very different country than it is today, and than it had been 50 or 60 years earlier. We were more egalitarian. We had our problems. My God, we had the Civil Rights Movement, we had the war in Vietnam and militarism. We were not without our flaws, and we were tremendous upheaval. But it was a country that had become much more democratic. And in 1970, in a survey of teenagers around the world, Americans, teenagers, and I was one of them then, were among the three most optimistic groups of teenagers in the world. And I was there. We had a sense we could use the government to lick our problems. Ralph Nader.
Well, we had those liberals like Richard Nixon.
Well, the whole culture had moved, so that Richard Nixon is talking about liberal policies.
Right.
And, Ralph Nader was the most respected person in our political culture. The idea that public service was a good thing, that government could be used to actually do positive things to solve problems, not just be a corrupt agent of the wealthy or bureaucrats. And there was one group of Americans at that time who hated that, and this was corporate America. And we go at length into the book. They saw that corporations and business were at the lowest level of public esteem probably in history by then. People were beginning to say, do we even need these huge corporations? Are they beneficial or are they a drag on the economy? And corporate America started a counteroffensive, which really is the whole foundation of Dollarocracy. We talk at length about a memo written for the Chamber of Commerce for the 50 leading CEOs in the country in 1971, a confidential memo by future Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, then a leading corporate attorney.
An important name in all of this.
A very important name in American history. And that document, that memo, which we have in the book.
An almost forgotten name, but really
hopefully it
important.
will help resurrect him, because his memo said basically to corporate CEOs in America, we have to take over the government again. The problem with American democracy is there's too much democracy. All sorts of people who normally were apathetic and didn't get involved are getting and they want to get involved, they want to get in office. And so after that memo, which was confidential and highly influential, we saw a 10-time increase in corporate lobbyists in Washington within 2 decades. 10-time increase. K Street became a term to represent corporate lobbying.
So
in
when's the timeline for Lewis Powell?
That's the early 70s, and this really kicked in the 70s, and certainly was full throttle by the 80s in the Reagan era. And this is when the whole shift of the political culture went rightward. When in 1970, 3% of retired members of Congress would become corporate lobbyists. Today, it's over 50%. And now you make so much more money as a lobbyist. Being in Congress is simply your sort of proving ground to K Street that you're reliable and you can make your $1 million a year salary when you leave. That's where the real chips get cashed in. And so that's why it's so important to look to this as a historical movement. The Citizens United and the $10 billion election, and on the other side of the coin, the newly liberated opportunity of states to suppress the vote in ways that were unconstitutional until last summer. These are the same sides of the same coin. They're part of a process to make us a less democratic country, to put power more and more in the hands of the few and the wealthy. And that it's a long-term project. It's been largely victorious, and until we address it, none of the great problems of our country are going to be solved meaningfully.
And I have notes on this, and I can't find them right now, the exact number, but that's right. People in the wealthiest 1/6 of the population vote at double the rate of the poorest 1/6. Yeah. Now that's just human nature, I guess, in some way, but it's being exacerbated, right?
No.
Well, I didn't mean human nature.
No, let me explain this to you, because this is a very important point. In our last presidential election in 2012, we had a 53% turnout of Americans over 18 who voted. In any other democracy in the world, that would be a scandal that would, they'd shut down everything for a week in the country. Germany just had a national election. They had a 72% voter turnout, and they were very disappointed at how low it was. We haven't seen 72% ever in the modern era. We have far fewer people that vote than other countries, and it's disproportionately poor people. The poorer one is, the less likely they are to vote.
Well, I guess we could do a half hour on why that is, because I know Jack Doppelt did a book on that about the people who don't vote. That's really kind of interesting. But if we just have to sort of set that aside and say that people of lesser means tend not to vote as much. But beyond that is what you're talking about now, this kind of like this affirmative effort to suppress whatever there is of that vote. And we saw those lines in Florida. I mean, we've seen it over and over again in the last certainly several years. And that has to have some effect also. but it raises it just kind of like begs this question to me of like, well, okay, but nothing's actually stopping the vast majority of people whose interests are not being served by this government from going out there and throwing the bombs out. Why doesn't it happen? I know that's a huge question, but we must think about it.
And I'm going to give sort of a counterintuitive answer to that. We have a much lower turnout we have had historically for a lot of reasons, which we can't go through all of them. But another way to look at American politics today is that we actually have an astonishingly high percentage of people who vote when you consider how irrelevant our elections actually are. The average voter who goes to the poll today, their local legislative district and their House of Representatives seat is gerrymandered, so that the vast majority, doesn't matter who's runs,
it's irrelevant.
It's like a Bulgarian election in 1960. You know who's winning the election.
Yeah.
In the presidential race, you've got the Electoral College. So in Illinois, nowadays, it's irrelevant who you vote for because the Democrats are going to carry the state. In some states, the Republicans will. There's only really 10 or 15 states that are even remotely in the purple turf. So if you're not one of those states, the Electoral College means your presidential vote is largely symbolic and irrelevant.
And in 2012, it's telling that, I know we want to talk about television and the media. I can't remember the numbers of, like in battleground states, the numbers of ads on one TV station. But the point being that here in Illinois, it was just a desert. I felt so sorry for Channel 7. I mean, they just made no money in Illinois.
Yeah, so people are inundated with ads. So there are some races where statewide races that can't be gerrymandered or the Electoral College doesn't apply. But there you run up against money, tons of money, unbelievable amounts of money, most of which pay for negative TV ads, attacking the opponent. And conversely, the other side of that coin is what we've seen, and we talk about this in the book, it's a key part of our argument, the complete elimination of journalism, of political journalism. It virtually doesn't exist. So citizens, if you're a voter in this country, a potential voter, you have very little to work on to know who to vote for, what to vote for, what the issues are. There's little to connect you. All you get are these moronic and obnoxious negative TV ads that really do nothing. I mean, they're illegal in most democracies, TV ads. I mean, they're considered poisonous. They're like chemical warfare is to warfare. That's what they're considered to a healthy election in Germany or Britain or France.
But unfortunately, as we see, they do work. They have an effect.
Particularly in the absence of anything else. If you get no other information and you're inundated with political ads, especially negative ads, they will move the dial. And that's why the people who spend $5 billion running these inane ads do it because they know they work.
Yeah. We're talking with Bob McChesney. He, along with John Nichols, have written Dollarocracy, and it is available now. I mentioned to you, Bob, that I want to be very jealous with the little bit of time we have here, and I want to focus on journalism and new journalism for the last half of the show because you've written extensively about this in your other books, but to try to capsulize it in a sentence, there was journalism in the United States that was Tom Paine and bulletins being handed around, and then there was the press where everybody was partisan, and somehow or other we developed this kind of professional journalism class where journalists are supposed to be objective, and it's all paid for by massive advertising because it's the only place they can go to get the eyeballs that they need in the newspapers and later on radio and television. And this professional class of journalism begins to develop. And it's fascinating that this period you were talking about, this kind of progressive period in America, parallels with and may in fact be a part of the fact that there was this professional journalism that, although it's decried in some corners today, it set the agenda. It helped set the agenda in some ways. I think you'd agree with most of that. Today, not so much. We've seen what we would say is the collapse of this professional journalism, and largely fueled by the internet. And we're today at a position where a lot of advocates for the internet are saying there's a new journalism. It's citizen journalism. Everyone is a journalist. Everyone with an iPhone is a journalist. And I want to quote back to you one of the most important things that I think you've written. The digital revolution has not rendered giant corporations clumsy dinosaurs on their way to extinction with a giant asteroid of competition and consumer empowerment. In grand irony, the internet has arguably become the greatest generator of monopoly power in the history of economics.
Yeah, it's one of the most striking things. This is larger than the question of journalism, too. Just if you look at the internet, it's produced enormous amounts of wealth, but it's concentrated in a small handful of companies. And what the internet does, unlike other types of industries, is it rewards, it's winner-take-all economics. If you get the lead in a network, like a Google search or Apple or Amazon, you tend to have complete market domination. So of the 30 largest, most valuable companies in the American economy today, 12 of them are internet monopolies. And by monopoly, it doesn't mean you have 100% of the market. Economists don't mean...
It's a different kind of monopoly.
No, well, when economists use the term monopoly, they mean you have enough market share that you basically can set the price, and you can determine how much competition you have by where you set the price. But you're in charge of the market. Everything goes through you. All the other players play off of you for whatever niche they have. And most of the companies that we associate with internet success, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, eBay, AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, most of those companies have market share in their core area equal to or greater than John D. Rockefeller had with Standard Oil in the late 19th century.
In his greatest
the
dreams.
greatest empire in the history of capitalism. These guys should make him a AAA guy trying to get to the majors.
He's somewhere looking at him and saying, wow, I wish I had done that.
I wish we had the internet then. So we get this spectacular amount of wealth in a very small number of hands, and we're only beginning to appreciate it now. It's happened so quickly, and these companies seem like they're such great guys because they don't charge you a lot. A lot of them don't charge you.
It's free.
The problem is that if you get something for free on the internet, you're not the customer, you're the product, and that's what people are trying to learn. What you sacrifice with Google and Facebook, and even with Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon, is they know everything about you, everywhere you go.
They're selling your information.
And this gets to your journalism question, Ken. This really gets to what I know you want to talk about, which is that for a long time we thought, well, there's old media, newspapers, these old timers, these fuddy-duddies don't know how to do it in the modern era. They don't have smartphones. They're a bunch of dummies. We're going to have a generation of a new type of digital journalism that's going to solve the problem and give us a lot of great journalism. And the interesting thing that's happened in the last 5 years, and the most important thing I think anyone who cares about journalism has got to understand, is that the advertising foundation, which was the basis of commercial journalism's success for the last century, providing 50 to 100% of the revenues, depending on the medium, is dying rapidly. Because as we go online, advertisers have discovered they no longer need to buy ads on a website to reach their audience. They now go through these networks that find you wherever you are if they want you online, whatever website you're at. They don't care if you're at the New York Times website or the Best Buy website or a sports website. And because of that, the revenues that go to support journalism online have pretty much disappeared. In 2003, a newspaper website kept 100% of all the revenue from the ads on the newspaper website. By 2010, it was down to 20%. Today, I suspect it's under 10%, and it's like a parabola. It's approaching zero. And that means that the commercial model of journalism is actually more alive in old media, which still sells ads, which still generates resources. And a lot of the journalism we associate with the internet today is being subsidized by old media. And when that old media declines and goes under, there will be no more journalism online.
Now, it's important to point out that we're not just old farts here sitting around talking about how it used to be better before, because I think you and I both would be very critical of what came before.
I built a career being critical on what came before.
That's right. But what we have today is essentially kind of it's sort of like the destruction, but with nothing replacing it. And again, I'm reminded of what was once said about, well, the supporters of this new world, and I get really aggravated when I see this, will tell us that we just simply don't understand. There is a new vision, there's a new world, everything is changing. And you talk about Clive Barnes 50 years ago saying of television, it's the first truly democratic culture, the first culture available to everyone and entirely governed by what people want. And there was a great optimism in those days about public media and how the media could be used to educate and inform the public. And then something happened. The corporate interests essentially took it over, just as they had done with radio before that. Just as there were people who said this about telephones. The telephones are going to revolutionize. And of course they did revolutionize, but it didn't take very long for it to be a monopoly. And if that monopoly hadn't existed in telephony in the turn of the century, we might have had fax machines in the 1930s.
That's right.
We might have had cell phones in the 1950s. But it was suppressed by this monopolistic instinct. And the question that is on my mind today is the question of where are we at, taking a look at the timeline of television. Where are we in that timeline in the internet? My suspicion is that we're about 1953 in television.
You know, it's hard to say. What I think we can say about the internet right now is we've got this dozen or so enormous companies, and about 5 of them that everyone recognizes: Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft. Those 5 companies should be viewed like continents on the globe. They're each a continent. One's North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia. And they're fighting for global domination. And they're basically trying to do what everyone else does. They're trying to offer everything. So they're all going to work up their iPod. They're all going to work up, or iPad. They're all going to work up their smartphone. They're all going to offer a search of some sort and a Kindle or a book reader. They're imitating each other in a lot of areas. They're the only players in most markets. There's the monopoly leader and then 1 or 2 other players underneath it. And they're trying to take over the world. And that's the key battle going on to look at business-wise. How's these giants play? It's much harder now for newcomers to enter. It's much less likely we'll ever see another Facebook or Google. It's crystallized and solidified. And what's also happened as a result of this is that these companies have immense amounts of political power as well. And we're in a situation
with money comes power.
Well, we talk about the 2 big to fail banks that everyone says owns the government. Dick Durbin says they actually own Congress. Well, there are only 3 too big to fail banks among the 30 largest companies in America in market value. There are 12 or 13 internet monopolies. It means that every crucial policy that comes before Washington dealing with anything to do with the internet or taxation of these firms, privacy, monopoly, these guys own the board. There's no threat to them whatsoever. The only time there's a debate in Washington is on the rare occasion, like with copyright, intellectual property. You might have people on opposite sides of the fence. Then there's a chance for public debate.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's closed off. It's not good for democracy.
We're down to about 90 seconds. It occurs to me that what we're seeing as the internet develops is that it is almost like a series of neighborhoods. That instead of expanding our horizons, it's kind of shrinking our horizons. You can live in your little, like an old Chicago neighborhood, you can live in your little community and talk to your own doctors and lawyers and opinion spreaders and never have to go outside that community.
Well, it's worse than that. Imagine if you lived in that neighborhood and what neighborhood you lived in was determined by advertisers who thought they could make the most money selling you stuff by putting you in that neighborhood.
Right. And finally, in the 30 seconds we got left, the battle for control of the internet is, to me, the biggest story there is, and we've unfortunately left it for the last 30 seconds. But Comcast, AT&T, the people who distribute the internet, they're the people you got to watch.
We'll start there. They're a cartel. They're government-created monopolies. They never won any free market battle. They own the politicians. We pay far more than most other countries for much worse service. They're a classic cartel. They don't have to invest in the network. They can charge us whatever they want.
Kind of like Ma Bell.
And they own the politicians.
Right.
Ma Bell at least had some public service regulations they had to meet. These guys have no regulations.
That was in the days when there were regulations.
That's right.
Oh, Robert McChesney, I wish we had another half hour. We haven't even scratched the surface of Dollarocracy. So I just want to thank you again for coming back. I know you've been on the program before, and I hope you'll come back again.
I'd love to do so, Ken.
Okay?
That'd be great.
All right, Bob McChesney for the University of Illinois. You can get his book, and it'd be a good investment. Investment's the word. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV, and of course, you know that you can find us on cable. But if you check this address right here on the internets, thanks to Comcast and AT&T, you can watch our show on iTunes thanks to Apple. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks for watching. We will be back next week, whether you like it or not, with another program right here on Chicago Newsroom. Thanks for watching. Bye.